Hi everyone, I'm Courtney and welcome to my God, Love, and Truth YouTube channel. In today's video, I want to talk about a pretty serious subject and something that I have personal experience with, which is the topic of depression and suicidal feelings. And as with all the videos on this channel, I'm going to be talking about those experiences and the truth of those things that I've learned from Jesus and Mary, and what God's truth about these things are. So that's what the topic is going to be. This will actually be a series of videos as well. I've done a couple of videos on different subjects. This subject about depression and suicidal feelings, suicide, I will make several videos about as well. For me, this isn't even, in some ways it feels like even a bigger topic than the videos that I did about sexual orientation confusion, because that experience, while there were lifelong emotions that contributed to it, that experience in that was only for a certain, like 5 years or so. Whereas this stuff for me is like a lifelong. And so, yeah, it's a big topic, it's a serious topic, but the good news and the whole reason that I'm making the video is that there are ways that these things can improve. There are ways that these feelings can heal, can change, and I want to show people that it is possible to be happy and to have happiness and to get out of the place that you're in when you have depression and suicidal feelings. And I have tried a lot of things over the years to address these things for myself, and the thing that has been the most effective, the truths that have helped me the most, by far, where I feel the answers to this stuff lie, are in the Divine Truth teachings, and so that is why I also want to talk about them as well. And as usual, I'm going to have videos, Divine Truth videos, that I have linked in the description below as well as after, so that you can go and you can watch those videos and get a better understanding of what the truth is about these topics and how we can change on these feelings, how we can get out of depression and suicidal feelings and into more relief and happiness and all of that. So there's good news, there's light at the end of the tunnel. This video at times might feel kind of heavy, but I'm making the video not because I want to make, to kind of say, oh, like, look at how awful my life has been, or isn't it so sad, like, isn't it such a bummer, those of us that have depression and stuff, but rather because I want to talk about it in a serious way, because it is a serious thing, but also discuss what I've learned, and hopefully that'll be helpful. So this video, this first one, is going to be kind of an overview intro one. I'm sort of trying to maybe make the videos that I make on this channel a little bit shorter than the previous ones were, and then more frequent, more frequent, more of them, just sort of shorter and more of them. So in this first video, I want to share a bit about my own experience with these things, and I also want to briefly go over different truths that I've learned about why this stuff happens, why we, on the planet, people have these feelings, and what the truth about them is, and some of the overview about how it can change. Now, there's a lot I'm not going to be able to say in this video because I'm trying to make more of them and smaller, shorter ones. But yeah, so it'll be kind of an intro, and then in later videos I'm going to get much more in depth about each of the different truths that I've learned about. I'll be able to pick different pieces of Divine Truth seminars and talk about them more in depth, share more of my experience about those things in depth. So yeah. So to start, the first thing I wanted to talk about is, an overview about my story with these things. So as a child, I wasn't sort of diagnosed with any type of like depression or anything really. In my childhood, the main things that I can look back and see, first of all, When I was a young child, I had an awareness that there were things going on in my family that didn't feel good for me, that felt really bad and really traumatic. And I do remember a lot of, something would happen in my family, something would happen to me that upset me in some way. And I remember sobbing and talking to God and pretty much pleading with God and just saying things like, can you please take me away? Like, can you take me to another family? Can I go somewhere? So it wasn't, I didn't have suicidal feelings or feelings of wanting to die, but there was this feeling of, I don't want to be in my life. This is awful. Can you please take me away? Can I please go? Why do I have to stay here? And those are some of the many, many emotions between God and I that I have had to sort through and still have to sort through, is these feelings that God didn't do that, didn't sort of take me away when it was really hard for me. So I had those feelings, and I was definitely pretty upset most all the time about how my family was and how my childhood was. I felt constantly angry about what was happening. I felt constantly sad. I felt constantly trapped and suppressed and oppressed, and I was pretty overwhelmed by it. As a child, I guess you could put this under kind of the mental health category, as psychology would often call it. I also struggled with OCD phases, not my whole childhood, but I would go through phases where I get very fixated on OCD kind of behaviors. And also in my childhood, actually this has been a lifelong thing, but in my childhood it started, although it was a bit different, where I would get thoughts and images dropped into my head all of a sudden about how I could hurt myself. And I'll talk about this more later. I now feel that this has been one of the ways I've had spirit influence in my life. But when I was little, they weren't accompanied by any dark feelings that I had. They weren't even necessarily accompanied by anything bad that was happening. I would do just like playing with my toys, and then all of a sudden I'd get this image of how I could hurt myself. So if I was near a knife or a razor or an edge of a cliff, or like a, hiking or something, or near traffic, I would just get these images of how I could go hurt myself or how I could cause my death. And when I was little, there were times where it really started to scare me because I didn't have that feeling of actually wanting to hurt myself at all. And so I didn't know why I was having these strong feelings come in these images, and it sort of felt like I was being coaxed or almost forced. There were times where I almost felt like I had to just sit on my hands in order to not do it. And I actually remember telling my mom, maybe I was like 7 or 8, telling my mom to please watch me because I felt like I was going to do something and I was really freaking out. And I don't know if she didn't want to deal with it or didn't know what to do. I don't remember her taking it seriously at all, but I remember being very scared that I would do it. I would do something. I felt like it was almost like I was having to hold my body back from doing it, even though I didn't have a motivation really emotionally to do it. And then throughout my life later, I still have had that. After I was no longer a child, I didn't get into this place where I was really scared that I would do something, but I would still have these images pop up all the time at random points. And then later, as I'll describe, accompanying different feelings of depression, and then I would have feelings of more of a desire to like hurt myself. But as a child, it was just these thoughts that would pop up. And then as a preteen, as a teenager, like the early teenage years, I entered a phase, well, actually late in my childhood, I kind of somehow made a switch where I was kind of aware of some issues in my family when I was really little, and I was quite upset by those a lot. And then it was almost like at some point, maybe I just decided, well, everybody says I have the most amazing family ever. My parents are always telling me I have the most amazing parents ever. They're always telling me how grateful I am for them. They're always saying how great our family is. Everyone's always saying how great our family is. Maybe I'm just crazy. And so after a while, I kind of went into this place where I thought, I just have the best family and the best childhood and everything's all good. And I was just, now I can see I was in total denial. But as a teenager, a preteen teenager, I started to get more shut down I mean, I'd always been very subdued for the most part. I'd always been pretty oppressed and suppressed, but I became more shut down, less creative. I was a very creative kid, and that just started fading. And I started to have feelings like, what's the point of life? Like, why am I doing all this? Why is anybody doing all this? I don't understand why we're here. Like existential kind of questions, but in a very sad, pessimistic, sort of negative way. It wasn't really it was just a feeling like, what was the point? And when I was a teenager, I was I was into a lot of music that was quite emotional, and like hard rock and things. And it's interesting when you look at music and what it reveals about where you were at or where you are at, what resonates with you. I was just thinking about it when I was preparing for this video, like in the last few weeks, and really thinking about what I wanted to share and how I could structure this series. And in that time, this singer named Chester he was a lead singer from a band called Linkin Park, and he committed suicide, like I want to say a week or a week and a half ago, something like that. And it really got me thinking, because when I was in high school, it may have been my favorite band. I mean, I knew the albums in and out. I listened to them all the time. I resonated so much with it. It's pretty hard rock, kind of metal, and the lyrics are a lot about just like suffering and emotions. And I was just thinking that because this lead singer was one of the main guys that wrote the music as well. And I was just thinking that made a lot of sense, looking back, that I resonated so much with that music, and it felt like cathartic in a way to listen to it. And it also was fitting in some ways, that like when I found out he committed suicide, I felt sad for him, but in a way I was like, I can just see all the links, anyway. And so, yeah, I was feeling pretty dark in high school, pretty dark. And then I just turned 17, and my parents decided to get a divorce, and my mom put myself and my brothers in therapy, not because she thought there was anything already wrong, but because she wanted to prevent some, kind of like emotional issues from taking hold, basically, because of the divorce. And so she put us in therapy. But what was interesting is she kind of did it as a preventative thing, or to sort of talk about what was currently happening. But quite soon after I got into therapy, I was diagnosed with severe depression and eating disorders. And it was a surprise to me, because, like, I guess I hadn't noticed. Now I can look back and see how obvious it was that I was depressed. I hadn't noticed that it had gotten that bad. My family, I mean, they didn't like pay attention to my emotions really anyway, in a real way. And so, they didn't notice anything. But by that time, kind of the last couple of years of high school, it was very dark. And it was the kind of depression where, I don't know, maybe there are different expressions of depression or different stages you can go through. But like a lot of people have a misconception that depression is always like feeling really sad or feeling really down. And a lot of people who have had depression will tell you that that is often not actually what it feels like. And this is what I'm illustrating about this period of my life, where I didn't feel sad, because that would be feeling something. That would be an actual feeling I was having if I felt sad, or if I felt pain, or if I felt grief. And this phase of depression for me was no feeling. I hadn't cried for years. I didn't cry. I never felt like crying. I would sometimes feel angry, but I never expressed it verbally or in any way. I was totally disconnected from any fear. I was just a zombie. I was just kind of going through life, doing my schooling, because that's what I was supposed to do. But I just often felt this existential thing every minute of my day. Like, what's the point? of any, like, I don't understand what the point of life is. I don't get it. And I felt like my life didn't matter, felt like it didn't matter if I existed. I felt reluctant about everything that I engaged in life. I just did it, but I didn't like connect to it. And yeah, and then about about maybe 18, 19 was when things got so dark, and I was so just, my life was falling apart in the sense of I was barely functioning. Like, it was becoming all I could do to just not live in bed all day. Like, the most basic tasks were such an effort for me. And I had all these health issues and that had developed, and eating disorders that were destroying my body, and it was bad. And so, but then these sort of existential questions started really taking a form where I started seeking, what actually is the purpose of life? No, but like, really, what is it? Because I can't figure out if there is one. It doesn't feel like there is. And, I went through phases where I would have kind of weird, I don't know what they would be called. I want to call them psychosis, but I don't think that's actually what they were. But I'd have episodes where it was almost like the depression or the suppression would get so intense that I would have phases of a day or a few days where I couldn't even talk. It was like I was like a vegetable. I didn't have thoughts. I didn't have feelings. I don't think I was overcloaked because I wasn't doing anything. I was just, and I couldn't talk. I couldn't function. It was very strange. I couldn't respond to people when they talked to me. And, but I started seeking. I started like researching spiritual stuff. I started researching different spiritual books and New Age spirituality, and I started doing yoga, and I kind of was, at the time, trying to connect with something bigger, to get myself out of this dark place. And I'll go into different aspects of my story more in depth later, but just to keep it moving. For about 6 years, late teens to early 20s, I ended up being quite heavily into New Age spirituality and Eastern practices. I joined various spiritual communities for periods of months and years, and I got into all kinds of stuff. And what I started to experience was highs and lows. So for the first few years of my depression in my teenage years, it was just flat. There were no highs ever. It was only low, only flat, only. When I started doing these New Age practices, I now think that a lot of this was spirit influenced as well. I would have these highs sometimes. I would like go to a yoga class, or I would go to do a big old meditation, or I would go to some spiritual lecture or kirtan or something, and then I'd come away and be like, life is amazing, oh my gosh, I'm so excited about life, everything's great, isn't life great? Oh, and I would like literally feel, it wasn't just that I was trying to do that. I mean, I was trying to do it because I thought that's what I had to do to be spiritual, but I also, I actually did have this energy surge, these sort of feelings inside my body, and feeling really like amped up. But at other times, I was right back in bed, wishing I didn't exist, wanting to die, begging with God to please let me go. Why did I have to stay alive? I don't understand. Why can't I just go? Please let me go. I don't enjoy life ever. I hate my life. I hate myself. I loathe myself. Why can't you just let me go? That type of thing. So it was very high and low. I also, by that time, had gotten into binge eating worse than I'd ever had in my life. So I'd always struggled with food addiction. I've talked about them in other videos I've made. But by that time, my binging was like, I would put away thousands of calories. I would physically hurt myself with food, and I didn't even care. I'd just keep going. And while food at various times in my life has played every role, and I've had every motivation to use it, there were times with this phase of binge eating where I was acutely aware that I was doing it to hurt myself. Again, not all my overeating was always for that reason. Many times it was just that I was bored or wanted to suppress a feeling in a more, like, not so much as conscious self-hurt way, or I wanted to feel less lonely, or like whatever it was. But there were times where when my binges were really bad, and I would think about the fact, and I would think to myself, I'm doing this because I'm too afraid to be a cutter. I always was terrified of blood. I would pass out at the sight of blood, like in an instant. I was always passing out. So I'm terrified of, one of my big fears is like blood and physical pain and stuff like that. So I knew I was never going to do that to myself. But it felt like I would think about it. I would think that I got it. I understood why people did it. I wanted to do it. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. But I wanted to hurt myself with food. I wanted to cause myself as much physical pain as I could. And I wanted to, and usually I was feeling a total rage with myself. I wanted to destroy myself. I wished I could destroy myself. That's what I was trying to do. And I did that a lot. And then other times I would be on these highs. And yeah, it was, but around the end of those kind of New Age years, a new thing started happening. This was still before Divine Truth. But I was reading books about the truth about eating disorders, the truth about binge eating and other eating disorders, how to heal those. Long story short, there were some great books, and they discussed how, like, essentially they were saying the reason you do this stuff with food is because you're suppressing emotions and you're not wanting to face certain truths about yourself and about your childhood. You need to look at your childhood, you need to face the fact of where these things came from, and you need to feel your emotions. And you need to look at why you don't want to feel the emotions. Do you think that they're going to kill you? Do you think that you're selfish if you have them? They had a lot of really good advice, and I, by that time, had tried 1.5 million things to be happier and feel like there was a meaning to life and not have these eating disorders. So I was willing to try anything, and I really, like, when I read this stuff, I had this feeling like, this is the truth. The answer is not me meditating 4 hours a day. The answer is not that I need to get the new essential oil. The answer is this. And so I really took it to heart. I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to feel my emotions. I'm going to face this stuff. And some of that had happened. You know, I'd been to some therapy, like I'd mentioned before. That therapist had helped me see some truths about my dad, that I thought I had the perfect dad. Maybe I didn't. But I really delved into this, and I went through a phase where I was releasing huge amounts of emotions. I would go through, I finally let myself connect with rage, which I'd never done before. I had always been a person who was like the sit pretty and quiet and be nice girl. And I finally connected with anger and rage. And I tell you what, I had so much rage, not anger, like, well, anger too, hysterical rage. The kind of rage where when I finally tapped into it, I was like, I couldn't believe how big it was. And luckily, for a lot of those years, I lived by myself in this little cottage in the woods. And it was really good for me to process emotions. And I tell you what, I screamed and I threw stuff and I broke stuff. Just my own stuff, like china. But I mean, I really got into this rage. I punched pillows. I threw shoes. I just really did it. And I also connect with some sadness, some grief. I remember having cries. And this part of it does still happen to me, but I remember at the time, it was the first time I'd ever unloaded this stuff, and so it was really acute and really often, where I would have sobs and cries in a way where I felt like I was actually going to die from that amount of sadness. Like, I felt like my body was going to implode, or like my heart was going to break. Like, physically, it was going to stop. It was like this intense feelings of just devastating pain, and I felt it in my body. Like, it felt like a bodily experience that was just really intense. And so it was really good, and that is when things really started to shift. And that was really good. And then I came across Divine Truth, and that was about 6 years ago now. So for the period, if I kind of go through the last 6 years, long story short, the Divine Truth teachings have helped me even more and helped me understand this stuff even more. But the truth is that I am not through all these emotions yet. But the frequency with which I have these feelings and the intensity that I have them is less. And it's not like it used to be that I would I was in a depressive state or a suicidal feeling state for years on end, years with no break. And then, it got to be a point where it would maybe be months with no break and then weeks with no break. And now I'm at a place where it's maybe, if I get into that state, it's a day or maybe a couple days. Sometimes if I'm really wanting to work through emotions, I can be in it for just a few hours and then I can get to something emotionally and it shifts. And the reason I was a bit hesitant actually to make this video, because I thought, oh my gosh, what if everybody's like, here's this girl who's listened to Divine Truth for 6 years and she still has these feelings. Like, I didn't want people to think that that has anything to do with like the validity of Divine Truth, because it doesn't. The truth is, first of all, the truth is the reason that I still have these feelings is because I have a desire to hold on to certain emotions, to stay in denial about certain things, to not accept certain truths. And that stuff I'll talk about in other videos as well. And also the other truth is that while I still have these emotions to an extent, it is so much better than it used to be. It is incomparably better. And I have Divine Truth to thank for that. I have Jesus and Mary to thank for that. And I don't feel I'm exaggerating when I say, well, it's hard for me to imagine what life would be like if I hadn't found Divine Truth and tried out some of the things that they recommend. But I don't feel I'm exaggerating when I say that Jesus and Mary literally may have saved my life. Literally. I don't know what would have happened, what I might have done to myself if I hadn't found it. So I am just insanely grateful. So that's the overview about my story. And now I want to use the next part of the video to go over some truths that I've learned about these states of depression and suicidal feelings. As I mentioned at the very beginning, this is not going to be an exhaustive discussion about it, but this is just sort of like a bullet point, these are some things. And then as this is sort of supposed to be an intro video, I will go into more depth later. And of course, you can watch the videos that I'll have linked where you can see what I'm referencing in more depth as well. So, in traditional psychology, in kind of the psychology, psychiatry, mental health world, depression, there's often an acknowledgement that there are environmental factors, or that what they call them often environmental or sort of like upbringing, right? So they'll acknowledge, yeah, if you had a crappy childhood, you might have depression, or if you were abused, right, traumatic events and things like that. But what's also interesting is if you read up on it, is there's still also a feeling of, and a teaching that in some cases it might not really have to do with a person's childhood or their life. It can be genetic. It can just be that they're born with some part of their brain that wasn't the right size, or something's not firing right. And it kind of leaves room to not really say that it's a soul-based thing, or that it's an emotional-based thing, or that it has to do with a person's upbringing in their childhood and what happened when they were little. And that there are links there. There seems to be, from what I can tell, kind of an out for that. Like, oh, no, you might not have had a crappy childhood. It might just be sort of a genetic thing. Don't worry. But my feeling, at least if I understand what Jesus and Mary have taught, is that it is always about a soul-based thing. It is always about an emotional-based thing. And it has everything to do with childhood and how we were brought up and things like that. And even genetic things, people who do have, say, physically different things with their brain, or there is something physically happening that is different from another person's responses in their brain, and XYZ, whatever. All of that is still actually an emotional thing, because anything genetic is something that happens because of us well, typically because of the suppressed emotions of parents. And so it really still all comes back to our emotions, the emotions we absorb from our parents, the things that were imposed on us emotionally when we were little, how we were treated, XYZ. So I guess that's the first point I wanted to make, is it is always about the soul. From God's perspective, there's no one that's just, they're born with depression, they're born with these cards stacked against them, and there's nothing they can really do. It's genetic. Yeah. And there's also no such thing, like, the other thing is I've noticed is there's a lot of feeling like, well, even if it is about childhood trauma, and it is about what happened to you growing up, that you can't really, like, there depends on where you look and what you read, but I've read stuff where it's kind of, it instills this doubt that you can really heal it. It's sort of just like, oh, yeah, that happened, that's really a bummer, now you're prone to depression, and that's just kind of it, here's the medication. So God's truth is that whether it's genetic, whether it has to do with your childhood, whether your brain has a certain thing that's happening, all of it is healable. All of it is reversible, and anybody, no matter who they are and what they've been through, can become happier and get out of this, like, sort of prison that they're in this way. Now, the other thing I've learned is that depression is a result of the desire to suppress emotions. So it happens because we're not, well, there's many reasons why it happens that I'm learning about, but one is that we're suppressing emotions. I've heard some great seminars that I'm going to link where Jesus talks about how rage and anger is one of the big emotions that is suppressed that leads to depression. That's what I've experienced as well, is that there's been a deep resistance to connecting with any kind of anger or rage when I was the most depressed, and it did alleviate when I started doing that. But I've also heard him say that it can be about suppressing lots of different emotions. So it's not just suppressing anger. And I know for me, when I had the worst depression, I'm usually or when I still have depressive states, I'm just suppressing everything. Not just anger, but sadness, grief, fear, everything. It's just a total disconnection from myself emotionally, total suppression. Also, one of the things that contributes to depression and then subsequently suicidal feelings is not accepting the truth about certain things, or believing in false things, believing in untrue things. So what I mean by that, there's a couple areas where that's the case. So for example, when we are not wanting to accept the truth about our childhood, not wanting to accept the truth about what really happened, how we were really treated, that is one of these areas where we're not accepting truth. We're having false beliefs about things, and that is going to contribute to these issues. Having false beliefs about, like, life and how God's created things, or even if you don't believe in God, sort of just like beliefs about life. So what I mean by that is, like, it is, to me, I still don't get it. I still haven't really understood this, but even the concept I've been learning from Jesus and Mary, that it's all about love, I didn't know that. Like, I had no clue that was the point. I didn't believe it. I didn't feel it. And so that's, say, something that I need to accept the truth about. Also, the truth about ourselves. So, for example, a lot of people with depression and suicidal feelings, there can be a tendency to really have issues with self-punishment, self-blame, feeling that we're bad, feeling that we're awful, different things like that. I'm not sure if that's universal for everybody who has it. I'm not totally sure, but like for me, for example, one of the things that has improved it is to face the truth about myself more, which I'm still not really willing to do very much, but in the sense of, like, so I have a lot of feelings. I've always had a lot of feelings, like, I'm an awful person, and I'm just a waste of space, and there's no point in me being here. All I am is just a bother to the world, and I'm a bother to myself, and I'm worthless, and I'm awful anyway, and I'm always hurting people and like different things. And so for me, for example, I've needed to face that those aren't really truths, most of those things. I also feel that one of the these areas of the importance of accepting truth has to do with God. So accepting that there is a God, and that God is a God of love, and that God loves us, all of us, and loves us in a different way than religions teach you, by the way, because religions claim that God loves you, but typically teach about a God that is quite hypocritical and quite ambiguous in when he chooses to love, and really not what the truth about love is, not unconditional love, not real love. So I'm talking from the standpoint of what real love is. There is a God of love, and that God loves us, loves me, loves you, and that God wants me to be happy and wants you to be happy and wants us to have a full life and wants to help us and wants us to support us. I mean, for me, I've had a lot of those opposite feelings about God, that God thinks I'm a bother and doesn't care about me and doesn't care what happens to me and has no interest and wants me to be happy and actually wants me to suffer and feels I deserve to suffer and be unhappy, right? These are all false things that I believe about God that contribute to my depression or suicidal feelings. And so with what we've talked about so far, one point was suppressing emotions, suppressing the actual experience of emotions, feeling them, or not doing that. Other part is not accepting truth. Not accepting the truth about many things, which of course even that's going to be an emotional process as well. Also, I want to bring up the point that spirits can get involved in these things. So, as a quick recap, when we die, we go to the spirit world. So we don't go and reincarnate right away. We don't just automatically go to sort of a wonderful heaven. There is an afterlife for every single soul. There is a spirit world that exists. That's where we go after we pass. We have a spirit body that looks like a body, and we go there. Now, there are a lot of spirits in the spirit world who used to live on Earth, who are very dark. There are also very good ones as well. But the dark ones, there are many dark spirits who unfortunately prey on and exacerbate feelings of people who are depressed and suicidal. And these spirits basically want people to feel this way. To be honest, it's hard for me to even imagine having these motivations, so I still don't quite understand why. But I know this is true because I've become more sensitive to them and I can feel them. I can feel them now when they see that inroad for me, and they come in and they take that advantage, and they what they do is they essentially try to reinforce these false beliefs, reinforce these bad feelings about yourself, reinforce these feelings that you can never be happy and there's no point. They want you to feel as depressed as possible, and many of them actually want you to kill yourself. They actually want you to commit suicide, and they will try to get you to do it. There are often spirits will influence people's suicides. Now, they can only do that when we've got the holes, or kind of like have given our consent in a way, like emotionally, to be influenced like that. So they wouldn't be able to do any of that influence if we didn't have those feelings where we were open to that. So you don't have to be scared in the sense of like, you know, if you have none of these feelings that they can just come in and make you kill yourself, because that's not the case. They only can, it's just like peer pressure on Earth, right? Like they can only do it if you're open to it. But it is something to be aware of, because you can't see the peer pressure from spirits like you can with people on Earth, and so you can mistake it for your own thoughts, or maybe they are your own thoughts, but then there's also these other things mixed in. And so for me, what it feels like is if I get into a depressive or suicidal state, it just feels like there is a band of spirits that just jump on that opportunity, and they just are like, yeah, you don't matter. What's the point? You're a piece of crap. Like, you're worthless. Just save everybody some heartache and get rid of yourself. Like, you know, and then I'll get in this place where I'm begging God to let me do that. Like, why can't I do that? And please. And the spirits just, they want that, you know? And like I mentioned before, with my childhood and all through my life, getting these images of how I could hurt myself and kill myself that would just pop into my head. I believe that those are actually spirits who want these things to happen. So then they're, constantly trying to make it happen. And so that's something to be aware of as well. Now, with suicide, we, like I mentioned before, we go to the spirit world. And the misconception a lot of people have, if they believe in an afterlife, my understanding is that even people who don't believe in an afterlife, let's say they're atheists or something, and then they commit suicide, it's still driven by this feeling that I won't have to feel my feelings. I won't have to stick with this pain anymore. I won't have to tolerate this anymore. It's sort of looking for a relief or a release or a peace of some kind. And then people who do believe in some kind of afterlife, there's often this concept that if they exit this life, things will be better on the other side in some way, shape, or form, right? Either they'll reincarnate right away, and then they just won't have to deal with this life because now they're in a new life. Or they'll kind of join like in the New Age stuff that I was following, it was sort of like, you just join the global consciousness, but it's this sort of teaching that you'll be happy then. It'll be like, great, as soon as you pass. Maybe a lot of religious people kind of believe that you just go to heaven. Unless you're like a really, 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 really bad person, then you definitely just go to heaven and everything's great and then you're happy. And the sad thing is, like, when you read, like, say, statements or talk to people whose family members have passed by suicide, like that, or friends, somebody committed suicide, you often will see people say, but at least they're at peace now. Like, at least they're at rest. At least they have that relief. They have that, they're in a loving space, they're in a good space now. And the truth is actually that when we pass, we go to the spirit world, we have our spirit body. Granted, these are not things I've seen myself yet, but we go to the spirit world and we actually have the exact same feelings, the exact same memories. We are the exact same person as we were before we passed. And whatever circumstances of the spirit world, wherever we are, whatever going on, is actually going to be a direct reflection of those emotions. And so, unfortunately, if you commit suicide, it will not be better. It'll be the exact same, but actually probably worse now, because now you've got to deal with this added thing that you did that to yourself, that you did that to your own soul. And that's not God trying to punish you. That's just the truth. And that is also not to say that just means, oh my gosh, now there's no way out of this. I'm just gonna be like this, because the truth is that the relief, the peace, the rest, the whatever someone's looking for by suiciding, you can have all those things. And the way that you have all those things is to feel your emotions and to face truths. So it is challenging emotional work. Like, it can be really intense. I can tell you that it can be, but I also know from personal experience that it can get so much better. You don't have to live in this place where everything is an effort and everything is hard and you feel bad all the time, or you feel numb all the time and you feel like you'll never be happy and you'll never have joy and you're not connected to anything that feels like it matters. Like, that's not how you have to live. And you can have that. You can change that. You can have a happier, more peaceful, less tormented life by doing these things, by engaging these things and by learning the truths about these things. And, another thing is I wanted to mention as well, because this has become in the last 2 years something I think about for myself when I get into feeling suicidal. I know I'm not going to do it, but I feel it pretty intensely, of like that desire still sometimes, is that we all have a soulmate. We are not just an individual, each of us. We are half of an individual. And so if a person suicides, then, like, if your soulmate's on Earth still, and they wanted to meet you, wanted to be with you, then now, that's maybe another 50, 30, 90 years that you'll have to wait to be with your soulmate, or more, depending on what the circumstances are. But something I've thought about is like, and I've even had times where I get so dark where I actually say to God, I've actually said to God, why did you have to make me with a soulmate? Because I wish I could just make this choice for myself. I wish I could just make this choice and not impact anyone else. I wish, and I thought that that was the truth for a long time. And I felt angry about it. I was like, I should be able to choose this for myself. I should be able to make this choice of whether I want to exist. Why won't you let me make that choice? And the truth is, if I did it, how is that going to affect my soulmate? Especially now that there's somebody that I'm pretty sure that is my soulmate, and it's like I couldn't do that to him. Even if I don't have enough self-love yet to feel strongly about not wanting to do it because I love myself, I do feel that, that would affect him. And by the way, I'm not saying that to try to instill guilt about wanting to do it, because what I'm thinking of is how, like, I've had a lot of shame. I have a lot of shame still about the fact that I've struggled with depression and suicidal feelings. And part of that is because I grew up, I actually don't know if it was before I was born. I think it was before I was born, or maybe when I was quite, really little. My dad's sister committed suicide when she was in her 20s. And it was a similar family dynamic in the sense of the order of the kids. So she was the oldest of 3 kids, and it went girl, boy, boy. And her brother was my dad, one of her brothers. In my family, I'm the oldest of 3 kids with my original parents. I have a half-sister now, but girl, boy, boy. And this aunt of mine, first of all, she wasn't talked about very often because the family was so angry at her for committing suicide. And when she was talked about, the only things that were ever said about her were how selfish she was, how selfish, how self-involved, how cowardly she was, what a coward she was. It was just so much rage and blame and hatred towards her. And so I'm bringing that up because when I'm talking about the soulmate thing, I'm not trying to say trying to shame you, I guess is my point. Because I've seen what that looks like, and all I can think about is my poor aunt, having had probably a pretty crappy childhood and all these emotions, and then all she gets once she's passed, her family has no interest in why it happened, no compassion for it. They just hate her for it, and they just feel that she is selfish and was a coward. So I'm not trying to say that to shame you for having those feelings. I'm just saying you do have a soulmate. You have another half of you, and you're not just one individual, you're a half of an individual, and everything we do affects our soulmates. And then I guess the last thing that I wanted to say is kind of this, in this sort of intro video, is the good stuff, which is the other truth that I've learned about this is that it is healable. It can get better. It can genuinely get better. And it doesn't even have to be a management thing, right? Some people think that the best they can do is just maybe manage the depression and suicidal feelings, but you don't even have to settle for that. I really believe that we can all get to a place where we are truly happy all the time. This isn't something we struggle with. And I have experienced that to an extent, and it's not, it's not like when I was in the New Age spirituality and it would be like these highs, but then I'd still have super, super lows. What I've seen over the years as I've implemented the things that Jesus and Mary teach to do and learned more truths is that it improves in a consistent way. In a consistent way that over time has gotten better, stayed better, never gone back to as bad as it was. Even when I do have these bouts, they don't feel the same as they did. They don't last as long as they did. And so, if you do have depression, please consider checking out these resources because it's worth a look and it could really help. And if you have thought about suicide, if you're thinking about suicide, please don't do it because it won't solve the issues. And there is another way out. There are other ways out of it, out of the, space that you're in. So this video, again, meant to be an intro, and in other videos what I want to do is go into some of these different things much more in depth. I want to use Divine Truth videos, like different quotes from Jesus and Mary's videos, and then talk about those things in depth. I also want to share more in depth like what I've gone through emotionally, what kinds of emotional releases and how they felt that helped me shift this stuff, right? Like what those huge rage releases felt like and what the pain felt like and what kind of truths that I've accepted that are helping me. And I also want to share as well where I am right now and why I still have some of these things, because the truth is I still have some of these feelings because there are emotions that I want to suppress. There are truths that I don't want to face. There are, there's a lot of things. And also, I'm almost forgetting this, and the reason I'm almost forgetting this is because this is one of the big parts that I am resistant to and that I don't fully understand, so I should have mentioned it earlier, is that addictions are a big part of all this. So in other words, we can get very addicted to feeling hopeless, to feeling sad, to feeling like there's no point. We can get addicted to pulling ourselves down. We can get addicted to false beliefs about things. We can get addicted to staying in this place. And so a big part of actually healing depression and suicidal feelings is actually working on addictions, on these things as addictions and seeing all the addictions in them that are wrapped up in this. That's not something you should use to judge yourself. Be like, oh, now apparently I've got all these addictions with it. But I'm just saying it is a lot. Like there's a lot of addictions in there to be deconstructed. That's something that I am still pretty resistant to. Some of my biggest addictions in my soul are around those kinds of things. Different beliefs I want to maintain, false beliefs, different emotions that I'm addicted to suppressing, different things that I'm addicted to not questioning the truth on, and things like that. So I want to also talk about addictions in other videos as well. So videos below, videos after. You can find more information on divinetruth.com. My website is godloveandtruth.com, and feel free to email me there at godloveandtruth.com if you would like to ask questions or you have any requests on any aspect of this that you would like me to clarify or share more on. And I will definitely be back with more information and more sharing on these topics. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon. Bye.